The Reign of Zeus by Barbara Drake, with adaptions by Miss. After the Trojan War was over, Zeus said that he would be the head of gods and men because he had done the most to overthrow the Titans and lead the younger gods to victory, but he divided the rule of the kingdom with Poseidon and Hades. Zeus ruled the heavens, Poseidon controlled the ocean, and Hades took charge of the world of the dead, or underworld. All the gods and goddesses lived on Mount Olympus. They settled themselves down and called it their new home. Zeus kept an eye on everything, everywhere. Poseidon looked after the sea and enjoyed riding over the waves in his golden chariot. When he was in a bad mood, which was often, he stirred up storms with his trident and hair-pronged spear, wrecking ships and drowning sailors. When he was bored, he would go to Mount Olympus and sit around playing games and gossiping with the other gods. After Hades became god of the underworld, he rarely left home and became a very gloomy fellow. He spent most of his time making lists of his wealth and sorting the dead into their proper groups. There were 12 very important Olympian gods and goddesses, and they were all so different that they rarely all agreed on anything. Fortunately, each one had his or her own special duties, and each was an expert on something, so they managed to get along and even depended on each other for some things. Zeus married his sister Hera, who then became the queen of the gods. She was also the goddess of marriage, but she spent much of her time nagging Zeus or spying on him, for she was vain and jealous. It is no wonder that Zeus spent a great deal of time away from home, changing himself into a bull, an eagle, a cloud, or whatever fancy struck him, so that Hera could not find him. Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, was the offspring of Zeus. She sprang forth from his head completely armed, and she was his favorite child. The Greeks loved Athena so much that they named a city after her. This city is Athens. Zeus tossed Hephaestus out of Olympus because of a quarrel, and he fell for 9 days and nights before he finally landed on the Greek island of Lemnos. The fall made him lame in one foot, but he hobbled about Lemnos doing the best he could. He was very good at forging things out of metal, and when Zeus saw what a skilled artisan he was, he brought him back to Olympus, where he could be useful, although he was both lame and homely, or ugly. Aphrodite, goddess of love, came out of the foam of the sea. She just appeared in a seashell one day, floating off the coast of Cythera. The most beautiful of the goddesses, Aphrodite had an embroidered girdle, or sash, which could cause anyone to fall in love with her when she wore it. But Zeus, grateful of Hephaestus for a service he had done, married Aphrodite to this most homely of the gods. Aphrodite, however, spent all of her time flirting with Ares. Ares, the son of Zeus and Hera, was the god of war. Ares was tall and handsome, but vain, and as cruel as his brother Hephaestus was kind. When Ares heard the clashing of arms, he grinned with glee, put on his gleaming helmet, and leapt into the war chariot. Brandishing his sword, he rushed into the thick of battle, not caring who won or lost as long as blood was shed. A vicious crowd followed at his heels, carrying with them pain, panic, famine, and oblivion. Once in a while Ares was wounded. He was immortal, but whenever he would get hurt, he would run back to his father Zeus and was healed. Needless to say, Zeus was very disgusted with his son. Ares was often drunk, always quarrelsome, and not very well thought of by the other gods and goddesses, but Aphrodite found him more interesting than her plain, hard-working husband. Apollo and Artemis were the twins of Zeus and Leto, a Titan woman. They were both skilled in archery and carried bows and arrows, golden for Apollo and silver for Artemis. They were also good at healing almost any illness. In many ways, though, they were the opposites of one another. Artemis was goddess of the moon and of hunting, and she was also the guardian of children and young animals. She had no desire to get married. She preferred hunting and running through the woods over household matters. She, the most handsome of gods, Apollo was the sun god and god of light. He disliked any sort of darkness or trickery, so he was also the god of truth, prophecy, and music. Hermes was the son of Zeus and Maia, a nymph. When he was only a few years old, he stole some cattle from Apollo and used pieces of their hide stretched across a tortoise shell to make a kind of harp. He called his instrument a lyre. Apollo was enraged at the theft of his cattle, but Hermes shrewdly offered to give Apollo the lyre in exchange for the cattle he had stolen. Since the lyre was just what Apollo needed for his music and prophecy making, he promised to forgive Hermes on one condition, that Zeus would find him something more useful to do than steal property. Zeus immediately saw where Hermes' talent lay, and made him god of merchants and trade. He gave Hermes winged sandals and a winged cap, with which he could travel more quickly than anyone else, and Hermes became the messenger of the gods. He was seen at all the important battles, delivering messages, and he raced back and forth when there were arguments. He seemed to be every place at once. Hestia, Zeus's sister, was the goddess of home and family. She never quarreled, but set a good example for the others by being quiet, modest, and kind. The most peaceful of the 12 Olympian gods and goddesses spent most of her time at home. Fires in her honor were kept burning at all the hearths in the world. In addition to the 12 gods and goddesses of heaven, there were three important earth gods: Demeter, Dionysus, and Pan. Demeter, Zeus's sister, was goddess of the harvest. Dionysus was the god of wine and theater, and Pan was god of the shepherds. All three were important in the daily affairs of man. Demeter had a daughter named Persephone. Persephone was abducted by Hades and brought to the underworld, where he married her. Demeter was filled with anger and cursed the world, causing plants to wither and die. This is where Zeus stepped in to try and return Persephone to home, although since Persephone had eaten in the underworld she could not leave. It was then decreed that Persephone would spend 4 months of the year in the underworld. During those 4 months, Demeter would weep, causing 4 months of winter in the world. Zeus was Dionysus's father, but his mother was a mortal woman, Semele. Perhaps because he was the only important god to be half mortal, Dionysus died each year. After the grapes had been harvested and the wine made, Dionysus was torn to pieces by his own drunken followers. But each spring he was reborn. Dionysus sometimes looked like a carefree, laughing youth, but at other times he appeared to be an evil old drunkard. He was able to look like both, for he was not only the god of joy, but also the god of madness and insanity. Pan was a solitary god. Sometimes he was not seen by the shepherds whom he protected, and they could only hear the music of his reed pipe. He had invented the pipe himself, and it could sound both sad and joyful, lonely and sweet. Pan often admired the girls he saw as he wandered through the woods and fields, but he was half man and half goat, and the girls ran from Pan because he was so ugly. Rhea was considered mother of the gods and goddesses, although not a god or goddess on her own. She married Cronus, and they had 6 children together: Hestia, Hades, Demeter, Poseidon, Hera, and Zeus, although Cronus had heard that he would be overthrown by his own child, leading Cronus to swallow all of his children. However, Rhea devised a plan to save Zeus from her husband. When Zeus grew up, he overthrew his father and brought his siblings back to life, thus beginning the reign of Zeus.